Call to order the meeting of the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District Board of Managers, May 26, 2016. All managers are present except Manager Blixt and Manager Shackleton. We have at least two individuals here to speak to the board at the time. Mr. Paul DeBone, if you'd like to come forward, there's a microphone at the table or one that stands. Mr. DeBone is here regarding an item later in the agenda, but is not able to stay. Please begin.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board. Thank you for having me this evening. I just want to take a few minutes. I'll leave the details of the agreement before you tonight to MCWD staff, but just wrote a few words and wanted to come up and first and foremost thank MCWD board and staff. We've been in this process for well over a year, and we're excited for the partnership. Gone through multiple regulatory scenarios, plan changes, and even a complete utility reroute. So it's kind of been a very collaborative planning process, and we appreciate the ability to be a part of it. We realize the environmental importance of the enhancement of the area for MCWD, as well as current and future residents in the area. And so with your support, we're ready to finalize the agreement and move forward with the extension of Lakeside Drive while restoring the 6 Mile Creek area, so they'll be done simultaneously, and I'm sure staff will fill you in a little bit more on that. We really do feel that it's a mutually beneficial scenario. Happy to be a part of it, within the community, not only for our future residents, but also for the existing residents of the greater area within the watershed. It's really a win-win. So I will leave the details of the agreement to MCWD staff, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you have regarding Lake Town 9th Edition. Just as a quick update, we did start utility work earlier this week. I've been coordinating closely with the DNR and MCWD staff through the process. So I'm really happy to see it get underway. As I said, it's been a while in the making, and here for any questions and appreciate the ability to talk kind of before things get underway. So,
Thank you. And I neglected to ask you to say your address and the company you are with.
Oh yeah, Lennar. I'm the land entitlement manager, and the address is 16305 36th Avenue North, Suite 600, Plymouth, Minnesota.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Charlo.
President White, managers, I just wanted to let you know that I will be leaving the district the end of June. I'm moving out to Wyoming. I'm really excited about it. I've enjoyed my time here. You guys do a lot of wonderful work. I'll have a lot to feel proud about. I'm glad I got to be a part of it. You have a very talented staff, and I've enjoyed my experience. So I just want to let you know. I'll be around a few more weeks. I want to give them a little bit of time to, find a replacement, and that's all I got. Thank you.
Ms. Charlotte, thank you for your time with the district, and I wish you well in your next chapter.
Thank you.
Very much. Where are you going in Wyoming?
And do we have your phone number?
Talking about skiing.
Alpine, Wyoming, just outside Jackson Hole. We got
Sure,
some
south of-
property out there.
South of Jackson Hole?
A little west, about 36 miles, just on the other side of the mountain pass. So
Goodness.
it's beautiful, so
Yeah.
I can't help it.
Thanks, Jen.
Thank you.
Is there any member of the public who wishes to address the board in a matter that is not on the agenda? I see no hands. I'd like to ask a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Managers Rognes and Olson. I don't think there are any changes. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. On the consent agenda, we have the approval of the minutes of the May 12th board meeting, and we have the check registers, general checking account, the surety account, and the 325 Blake Road checking account. We also have resolution 16-048 regarding joint funding of the gauge station. Resolution 16-049 regarding funds for the Lake Minnetonka Zebra Mussel Study. Resolution 16-050 regarding an agreement with the USGS to perform a zebra mussel control study. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed. We I have a brief update, 3 items as my president's report. First of all, I attended the Charleston Thune Bandstand dedication in Victoria on May 18th, along with Manager Olson and some members of staff. We also saw the adjacent rain garden and signage, all part of a Cynthia Krieg grant-funded project. I want to thank Administrator Erdahl and the staff involved, in particular Mr. Lochner, who of course works with grants, and Ms. Mamayak for her remarks of the dedication, which gave a very eloquent description of the partnership that made that bandstand come into being. We will be getting a report, of course, on the board retreat last Saturday, a subsequent agenda, but I wanted to make a few comments. The purpose of that retreat was to have the board see in person the 6 Mile Halsted focal geography where we will be spending so much time in the coming years, and by seeing it to really appreciate the terrain in ways that surveys and topographical maps cannot possibly, aerial photos don't convey. So I know that I certainly will remember what we were seeing out there on the ground as we go forward. I want to, we saw really a gamut of things, a very well-crafted itinerary. We saw everything from agricultural property through many, many levels of iterations of development, stages of development. And I want to thank Administrator Erdahl and staff, and particularly Ms. Brown, for that very well-organized and well-composed itinerary. The third item is that we will be adding a joint committee meeting for budget discussion purposes on June 16th, added to the existing schedule, and that will be posted, of course, going forward. Then Manager Olson, a report on operations and programs.
And just prior to that, I also, in addition to the bandstand, was able to go to the AIS CARP update for the project out in 6 Mile, and which was conducted by the University of Minnesota team as well as our team together, and very well received by a lot of people. Tremendous attendance at City Hall, was almost full, and a lot of interest in how we were coming to the end of that project. So kudos to Eric and his team. In terms of the agenda item here of the OPC report, all the board members were at the meeting tonight. We did review the spotlight on AIS presentation that Craig and Eric have presented. And then we went through a detailed budget process analysis that is progressing through its development, and then also discussed the beginning of a biannual salary survey update.
Thank you.
Which should require a motion to request the president to appoint 2 managers to a sub.
Oh, we agreed to do it. We never did it.
Well,
okay.
Yeah.
Good point. We also recommended that a task force be put together to assist staff and the consultant in determining what the best route would be for our needs. And right now, the 2 that are volunteered for the task force are myself and Bill Becker.
I would appoint Managers Olson and Becker to a task force to assist with the salary survey scoping process. I need a second.
Second.
Or a motion. I'll make the motion. There's a second from Manager Miller. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Manager Miller, we now have meeting minutes in the board packet from the Planning and Policy Committee.
Yes, the minutes are, I want to commend the planning staff for writing such great minutes. They don't require much memory on my part, but a couple things that just should be called out is that we discussed on a high level assessing the district's organizational effectiveness through the long-term focus on future direction and planning and organization, just to lay to develop an outline so that we could bring to the full board at a retreat for further discussion about direction of the whole organization. We reviewed the CIP plan, which everybody's familiar with, and we had updates on the comprehensive plan and the 6 Mile activity.
Thank you. Any questions of Manager Miller? You'll see that the upcoming meeting and event schedule is printed, and of course, we'll be adding to that the June 16th joint committee meeting at 6:45 at the Thursday evening here. We're on to item 9.1, the ecosystem evaluation program update. Ms. Dooley, Ms. Christensen, and Mr. Bischoff.
Excuse me 1 second.
Certainly.
Good evening, President White, Board of Managers. Just wanted to give a quick recap on the ecosystem evaluation program before Joe Bischoff from Wake Associates goes into detail on the progress of, of the lake portion of the E-grade.
It requires a magic wand.
It does.
You have the
Don't know
wrong
why
tool.
it's not working. Alright, so what is an ecosystem service? It's a service that nature provides to us humans for free. We can get recreation, we can get cleaning, drinking water, and nutrient cycling. So those are the services that are just many that we can assess. Currently, the district's only assessing nutrient cycling and surface water. Yeah, thank you. So like I said, nutrient cycling is our current system, and we're only looking at it in deep lakes. We want to add 5 additional ecosystem services under the E-grade program, and we want to look at those services, the performance of those services in different landscape types besides deep lakes. So we want to add shallow lakes, wetlands, streams, groundwater, and uplands. Here we go. So the mission of the Ecosystem Evaluation Program, or short E-grade, is to develop an integrated management evaluation tool. We want to assess condition of the watershed, identify target areas, and link that back to management strategies to put projects in the ground to improve and protect our target areas. So it's really strengthening the connection between research and monitoring and planning. So how are we going to do this? We're going to look at all of our ecosystem services in each of the 6 landscape types, create a grade, and then look at upscale that to the sub-watershed level, and then to the watershed level. So currently we're developing the program with Group 1, which is the 3 sub-watersheds in blue, 6 Mile Marsh, Schutz, and Minnehaha Creek. The first E-grade report will be released in 2018, and then so forth. The next one will be in 2021, the green grouping, and then the yellow in 2024. Then by the fall of 2024, we'll actually have a watershed E-grade report, which will summarize comprehensively the health of the entire watershed district. So where we are. We started this program in 2014. The first report's supposed to be released in 2018. So where are we at right now? We selected our ecosystem services, and we're in step 2 and 3, because we split developing the landscape type, the ecosystem services by landscape type. So first we're developing lakes, streams, and wetlands, and then we're going to be developing uplands, hydrology, and groundwater. So we split that. So step 2 and step 3 have been split. We're here tonight to talk to you about the progress about lakes, deep and shallow lakes. So we're at step 3. And then we will be bringing to you later this summer, I believe, streams. So that's where we're at, and I'm gonna let Joe take over.
Presentation.
Yep.
Why is Schuts designated as a sub-watershed?
It's designated as a sub-watershed. We
You-
chose it because it's one lake
Yeah.
sub-watershed, and we have several of those in our sub-watersheds. So it's one of our test sub-watersheds.
Oh,
We chose an urban one, Minnehaha Creek, 6 Mile, which is more rural, and then we wanted one of those characteristics ones where it's just one lake and one stream impacting Lake Minnetonka. So that's what we chose.
okay. Thanks.
So I'll start with saying thank you for hiring us to do this project. This has been really fun, really challenging. It's been an exercise in self-doubt at times, but it has been very, very good process to go through. So thank you for the opportunity to do this. I think it's really kind of exciting to do something different, and I do think that this is very forward-thinking, a different way to look at how you manage watersheds, how you manage your resources, and it really is breaking down some of the silos that are out there in the management units. It's PCA, DNR, all these different groups that are kind of working in their silos. We're really trying to bring all that together. So hopefully I'll give you a sense for that as we talk about lakes today. So if we go through, these are the ecosystem services. We're going to talk about lakes today. I'm going to talk about them as one big group because there's only one small difference between deep lakes and shallow lakes, and that's whether we apply a fish IBI. Shallow lakes tend not to have great fish communities. They're boom bust because of their shallowness, some of those pieces, so we don't really have an index to apply there. So we're really looking at vegetation as the key one there. So here we have the 6 ecosystem services: biodiversity, habitat diversity, nutrient cycling, flood, recreation, drinking water supply. And then these are the metrics that we've chosen underneath each one of these. And so we've really been focusing on the biodiversity, the nutrient cycling, and habitat diversity, because the flood control and drinking water come with groundwater and hydrology. So those are going to roll back in as we get underway with those. And then recreation, we have all the data, we're still trying to tease that out. So I want to focus on some of the habitat diversity, biodiversity, and nutrient cycling. So if we go to the next one, we chose the biological condition gradient as our framework for developing the system. This is really what's used for these indices of biotic integrity that are out there. And it basically states the fact that as you increase stress, you will change the biological community. So it will begin to degrade. So a perfectly pristine system that doesn't have a lot of high level of stress will have a high level of community diversity and sensitive species and those things that you would expect. As you increase that stress, it starts to select for these other species. So this is gradient, right? And that's what we're using. It's a disturbance gradient. That's what we're managing in the watershed, is how do we manage the effects of disturbance. So this is the gradient. This is kind of the framework that we've chosen to build a program around. Next slide. So let's talk about biodiversity. So the first question you ask is, how do you define biodiversity in a lake, right? How do we begin to define this and work at that? Well, you want to have a fish community that's diverse, meaning it has lots of different species, native species, species that tend to be intolerant to pollution, right? That means you have a good community that's not stressed out that's in there. And vegetation is the other piece of that. And we really focus on submerged vegetation because that has more of an impact there. Again, diverse, native, should have lots of these sensitive species that are in there. So we start to look at these as a community through an index. So if we go to the next slide. What we've chosen is, for fish, an index of biotic integrity. This has been developed by the Minnesota DNR, where they've gone out and sampled the fish, and we've done this in Minnehaha Creek lakes. You can see the trap nets up in the upper left-hand corner, and then you also do electroshocking in the shallow areas, so you can get the smaller species. And what you're doing is you're going out and measuring the number of species that you catch, what are the species, and defining the community that way. Okay, and this is being applied statewide, so we have a database to compare to, which is really nice. So we can say, how do we compare to northern lakes? How do we compare to other lakes in our ecoregion? And then we break it out, and we've chosen 4 categories to do this. We've chosen exceptional waters, supporting, meaning that it supports the ecosystem service but could be better, right? Impaired, meaning it's not providing the ecosystem service at a level sufficient for what you would expect. And then degraded, these are your highly degraded, highly disturbed waters. And you come up with scores. We have group 2, 4, and 7. Lakes are classed into different groups based on the expected fish community. And then you can have this narrative description. So an exceptional community would be a species composition near reference conditions, meaning natives, intolerance, that very undisturbed condition. Okay, so each of these ones, we're going to break it out into exceptional, supporting, impaired, and degraded. This kind of follows the same vernacular that the state uses in their regulatory framework. So it follows the impaired waters. We're using some similar breakpoints so that we can manage within that regulatory framework too. Again, trying to bring DNR stuff, PCA, regulatory frameworks all together into this system. So if we go to the next slide, this is just a summary of the lakes of which we have fish IBIs for in our tests of watersheds. You can see there's 2 lake class groups here. There's lake class group number 2 and 7, and these are the ratings. So the green line on the top, anything above that's considered an exceptional water, right? An exceptional fish community. Above the middle red line, those would be your supporting fish communities of a sufficient quality to support that ecosystem service. Between the 2 red lines is your impaired, and below is degraded. And what stands out to you here, or to me, like Parley Lake, that's one that I know, and I consider that a degraded water. Fish community is actually supporting the ecosystem service. It's more diverse than you would expect. You can't always predict just by water quality what the fish community is going to be. So this measurement allows us to really get at that. So that was a surprising result to me. But you also see a fair amount of these lakes that we've done are impaired in terms of the fish community. They're not native enough, they're not tolerant enough, so it's not a resilient biological community. It's definitely showing signs of stress. Okay, so we have all the lakes done that way. We go to the next slide. For the vegetation, we chose the Floristic Quality Index. And this is also being applied by the DNR and kind of an index of biotic integrity approach. But all it is the number of species. You go out and you measure the number of species that you find in a lake, right? And then some of those species are assigned a species sensitivity value, or a C value. So the more sensitive to disturbance it is, the higher the C value changes the score. So a high Floristic Quality Index value means it's diverse and includes a lot of species that are sensitive to disturbance. Okay? So again, if we apply this, did a lot of work in the vegetation. I should note, this is stuff that you're already doing, right? You're out doing point intercepts surveys on your lakes for the vegetation. You're trying to understand the invasive species and the richness. It's just a way of now analyzing that data and looking at it on a broader watershed scale so you can start to figure out what's going on with your lakes as a whole and where you need to work. We're also looking at shoreline condition. The DNR has a score the shore system, it's called, and it really breaks up the score the shore. Oh, I've got one ahead of you here. So habitat diversity is the other piece. Biodiversity, and now we're going to talk about habitat diversity. We're using the FQI, that Floristic Quality Index, for both of those. So that's why we put this slide here. So it comes back to how do we define habitat diversity, right? And you get into, well, a diverse and robust vegetation community should provide lots of habitat. And you think about it from a waterfowl aspect. There's certain species that are good for nesting, species that are good for food. If you have a diversity of those species, provides more of those services as habitat. Okay? And then you should have a complex natural shoreline. The more complexity there's a shoreline, woody debris, different species of vegetation, those types of things, the better habitat it provides for fish. And the DNR is working on that relationship between this scoring system, the Score the Shore that we're going to show you, and their fish IBI. So it provides an analysis framework for us. So if we go to the next one, this is the Floristic Quality Index. Again, same concept. Green is those exceptional values. And what you notice is none of your lakes demonstrate that we've sampled so far an exceptional vegetation community, right? Which means it's not providing the habitat you want, it's not a resilient biological community. There are some in there that are supporting. There's a handful, I think there's 5 or 6 in there. Then some impaired, and there are some significantly degraded. So again, it gives you that framework that goes in there. Score the Shore, this is the program here. You can see it breaks your shoreline into 3 variables. So you have the water condition, the near shore, and then the shoreline condition. So it's looking at a number of variables there, down woody debris, vegetation diversity, how much development stuff's on there. So if we use that, we've only done this for 4 lakes so far, if you go to the next slide. District staff is currently working on a desktop approach for this, okay, where they can actually go out without the field work and do the desktop analysis and get the scores. And then as the summer progresses, district staff will be out validating those numbers. We've done these 4 lakes, and we did a pretty good job at desktop. Almost got the same scores as we did doing it in the actually in the lake itself. And here again, here's what's interesting to me. I think of Pearson as a great lake, right? Great water quality. It's a beautiful lake, but it has a degraded shoreline, and it actually has an impaired fish community. So it tells you water quality is great. You're good there. What should you be working on? working on shoreline conditions to help support that fish community, because that's where you're lacking in that kind of piece. Wasserman is also an interesting lake, right? And that I see is highly degraded, has carp, but the shoreline condition's actually pretty good. So you're not worried about the habitat there, you've got to focus on the invasive species, carp, and some of these other things. So this is kind of the framework that it allows you to start making decisions about how to manage it and understand the health of your system. Okay? Next slide. So this brings us to aquatic invasive species. This has been kind of a difficult discussion within this whole process, and this is where the headaches come in. But aquatic invasive species are more stressors than they are indicators of health, the way we see it. So if you have the presence of aquatic invasive species at a level high enough to exert pressure on your biological community, it will change it and stress it in a poor way. But it's not really an indicator of health. So we've been trying to figure out, how do we fit this into this program? You know, it can outcompete native species, it can alter the food web, it can do all these things, but it doesn't really indicate health. We also know that some invasive species are actually seen as good things. Rainbow trout are actually invasive species in a lot of areas, and people, it's desirable to have rainbow trout in their streams. They want to fish for them. So how do we start to deal with this? We want to make sure that the program can deal with situations in lakes where maybe curly pondweed or Eurasian water milfoil exist, but aren't exerting the pressure at a level that's changing the biological response. So we're measuring the biological response with the index of biotic integrity, but we're also looking at stressors. So this is what we're working on right now, is trying to figure out within the district's AIS program how this fits into this assessment framework. So if we go to the next slide, some of the data that we're evaluating using, we've picked 6 species that we know can have significant degradation effects on lakes. Curly pondweed, Eurasian water milfoil, zebra mussels, carp, flowering Russian Chinese mystery snail. And we've just done an inventory. We've used the district's inventory of which lakes these exist in. So obviously, if you have more invasive species, you're exerting more pressure on that biological community than less. So this just kind of sorts it out. So we're evaluating how we're going to work that into the overall program. Next slide. Nutrient cycling, I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. This is the traditional method, where we really use the state database to figure out what's exceptional water quality, what's degraded, the state standards in there for impaired and supporting. So this is pretty easy. So now it comes to this. What does it all mean? How do we start to pull this together into something that's meaningful? And believe it or not, I find this table meaningful, although it's probably intimidating when you look at it the first time. But really what you have is you have your ecosystem services across the top. Then you have your metrics in each one of these. So the fish index of biotic integrity, the fluoristic quality index. And then you have each of the lakes that are in there. And you can go across this and you can say, it's impaired for fish. So if we look at the top one, Pearson's, I'll show you this. It's impaired for fish. Good plant community because it's supporting, but it's really exceptional water quality, but the shoreline's degraded. It seems pretty obvious where to go when you do that kind of analysis in terms of what can I do to make a difference in Pearson Lake. And that's really the framework we're trying to establish here. So if we look at this, we can compare 2 lakes that I know well, just from the 6 Mile Creek study, Wasserman and Pearson. And Pearson's, again, you know, I told you, degraded shoreline, degraded fish community, they're probably really good. So there's opportunities there. Wasserman's a different story, impaired water quality. And when you look at sequence of events, that's where you start. And then carp is the other one that's in there, because the fish IBI is impaired. So it starts to let you figure out, you know, what are the different aspects of what's going on in terms of providing these ecosystem services. So next slide. So again, we're trying to finish this up with the other ones. As we finish the hydrology section, we'll roll that back in, and the report card will look something like that. But we did do a little mock-up of what a report card could look like. So we want to start seeing, and again, this is not the final product. This is not going through the your outreach folks or anything of that. But I want you to see how this can come together to tell a story about your water bodies. So you can have a front page that looks something like this, where you have a picture of the lake, and then a general write-up, this is the condition of the lake. And then if we go to the next slide, you could have a summary by each ecosystem service, where you have the ecosystem service. How's it doing for biodiversity? The fish IBI tells you that it's a degraded community. We know that carp is exerting pressure on that community. That's what needs to be dealt with first. The fluoristic quality index, and we may change that terminology, right? It's a vegetation condition or something that people understand, but then put those values that are in there. So you can see how it starts to form a 2 to 4 page summary of each water body, and then we see rolling that up by sub-watershed, your management units, and then an overall watershed report card. So it really starts to flesh all that out. But I just wanted to show you how there are ways to take this information that's highly technical and boil it down. Another thing is, there's a reason that we have each of those, if we go back to that complicated table, the reason we kept all these separate, it allows you to sort your lakes by different things. So you could ask the question, how are we doing in shoreline condition for all our lakes in the watershed? Do we need to operate a shoreline restoration program, or do we need to develop a program around that? It allows you to sort those lakes and figure out how many lakes are in those different conditions.
You can tell that I'm not a scientist, so I'll ask you've got in nutrient, I see that most of the lakes that we've worked on, like Calhoun and Brownie and Taft, are in the darkest green. Is there any way that you can measure what impact our projects had to create this positive outcome?
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Good question. I don't know if we have an answer for that. I mean, we can look at when the project was put in the ground, and if we have data prior to that and then after that, we can then say to some extent that maybe that project had an impact. But
I think you can go back in
Yeah.
time with some of these metrics and score it at different times if you have those data sets,
Right.
look at the projects that you've implemented and evaluate that change.
right,
Okay. The only other, the second part of the question, because it's the first time I've totally understood what this project is, and I'm really impressed. But how is this information shared with the AIS in the planning department? I mean, how integrated is this, so it isn't just a silo of wonderful information that isn't useful or put in the form and fashion for the planning and water quality group?
it's a very good question, Manager Miller. Board of Managers, AIS and E-Grade, or AIS and water quality staff are working together. So we're on the same page when developing this and understanding the results. Planning, we actually plan to develop. We meet with them when we have these kind of updates. But we also, once this is actually implemented, we plan to have a report just for the planning, so they can quickly understand what the results are, get the information, put it into projects.
So
Then there'll be a public version of the report. That's at least tentatively what the plan is. We are working with them, and we plan to continue to work with them.
So you're not duplicating services or anything? Thanks.
Well, I wasn't worried about duplicating, because this is, I'm more worried about being useful,
Yes, this is,
or being available in a useful form.
management, we want this to be useful. We want planning to use this. So that's all our intention is to have this output to be useful.
I think it's why we chose 6 Mile Creek as one of the tested watersheds, since that's one of your focal areas. We know a lot about it. We've been working with Anna and the planning team around 6 Mile, and also working with staff to figure out how it's going to inform the plan, right? Are we using the same terminology in terms of ecosystem services and establishing that? So we have been working very closely with them to make sure that we're trying to all be on the same page with that.
As well as why we chose Minnehaha Creek as well. You remeandered the creek twice there. We want to see how that's helping that.
Good point.
Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Bishop.
That's what I have.
That's
It was perfect timing.
You know, it's interesting that, I'm sorry.
Manager Becker?
Madam Chair, how do you grade the creek? Is it the sum of everything that's going into it, or are special efforts being made to measure the creek itself?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and we just had a technical advisory committee meeting this morning going over the creek system. So we'll be having a presentation here to the board about how we do the same thing for the creeks. It's a mixture of geomorphology, what's the wetted width, what's the biological community of macroinvertebrates and fish. There's a number of different metrics that we've developed that are applied to streams in a similar way that we've developed them for lakes.
Minnehaha Creek is our biggest challenge because it's the longest creek, and how do we break it up? And so that's what discussing with the TAC today was what we talked about.
Thank you.
Manager Shackleton?
Just one quick follow-up question, I'm sorry. We've broken the creek up into reaches for other purposes, and I found that to be a really useful benchmark for different needs, for different areas, and
We plan so Diane Spector has been the one working on the stream section, and she took the 20 5 reaches, I believe, and broke it down to 7 in the upper and 6 in the lower. So she's really combined them based on similarities in geomorphology, water quality, et cetera, et cetera. And so that it's just easier for us to digest it in a report format if you have 7 reaches versus 25. So.
Well,
Manager Rolls?
Well, there was a comment that we made when we were first coming up with this idea, and that is, given the grading system we are today, if we bring in these other variables, chances are people's grades will go down.
Mm-hmm.
Because now they're being graded on shoreline, and they're being graded on a variety of other things. Yet, they also could go up. I mean, I saw Wasserman score high on 2 of those, and I was not expecting that. I almost want to run out there and tell the folks, but anyway. It's interesting that they do have some, under these circumstances, benefits that they're poised. As long as they can solve one problem, they can magnify it.
And I mean, besides being hopefully a useful planning tool and integrating, helping with deciding where projects should go and improving our water resources, it's really a public education tool as well.
Sure.
We want them to be more educated on what's going on in their water, in their watershed. But then that also will empower lake associations, like Joe was saying, that, okay, so if Pearson's has a degraded shoreline, maybe that's what the lake association can target, is improving their shoreline. So.
Manager Miller?
I think Lars had a comment.
Mr. Rudolph?
Yeah, I was just going to mention that I think kind of following up on that is trying to figure out the impacts of things, and that this is kind of a snapshot in time, like our current lake grids. So I think one of the biggest uses and improvements is going to be looking at trends over time, to look where things are going more directional on a longer scale. So this might not be as useful in the first year or two it's implemented as it is in 3, 4, 5 years down the road. And I think one of the big challenges and opportunities is to figure out, to Manager Miller's question about how we can measure the impact of our projects, because we can have some pre-project data and some post-project data, and we can make some assumptions there, but it's sometimes hard to isolate the variables in terms of what other things might be going on in the landscape around there. So I think we can look at those. It's not going to be 100% definitive, but I think we can really demonstrate the return on investment of our projects too. So I think those are kind of some of the utilities for this.
Right, to follow up, Manager Miller, Board of Managers, we'll be bringing, the Research and Monitoring Department will be bringing a presentation to you on the June 9th, and really talking about how the department's switching focus and really looking into investigating effectiveness monitoring to assess the effectiveness of our projects and some of the results we've been doing already, getting the results already.
Manager Miller?
I thought that Brian's question was leading to on the creek. We've got, especially in Minneapolis, where there's so many outfalls, that it could help prioritize our planning effort. And I think a fewer or more reaches that are measured might be more helpful for our planning effort. So, isn't that kind of what you were thinking about? Or?
Well, I was really getting into just kind of, it's hard to think about the creek as one entity, and we have our planning documents to break it up into whatever the number is. I think it's a little more than 25.
Something.
25 is a number.
Yeah.
Breaks it up into 25 pieces, and we've used that to craft our plans. I mean, the one thought I didn't get to was, if we're going to create kind of a new system, will that integrate in the old one that we built our plans off of? And I'm not necessarily looking for an answer, but that's one concern that I get to. And if there's a better way to communicate that, by combining for communication purposes, that's great. I do think that the more granular information we can get for planning purposes and for project purposes, that's better.
Manager Shuggleton, Board of Managers, let me clarify. So Diane Spector did group those reaches into smaller, to more defined reaches, but all that micro data is underneath it. So we can still go down to a more detailed layer and see each individual reach. So, or the sites that were monitored at those reaches.
Sure.
Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay.
And I do recall, we had a presentation about how we were going to be, we were pulling out some monitoring stations.
Mm-hmm.
I
Oh,
recall
reducing
that's-
monitoring sites
Yeah,
It
on the
was
creek.
on the lake.
on the lakes, and
There
we've
was
done
one.
some on the
Well,
streams.
There's like one, maybe two in like one in
There's one on the
Edina.
edge of Edina and one on the edge of Minneapolis.
This shouldn't that should not impact what we're doing now.
This will rework your whole monitoring program
Mhm.
though, because it's all going to be fed and you're creating the analysis system now that defines how you collect your data and what data to collect.
Mhm.
So there will be through this process a reevaluation of how you're collecting data and how it feeds into this program.
Make it more effective.
Sure. Thank you.
And mentioning the reduction of monitoring stations reminds me that when I looked at the grades, I think this was the first time I had seen on the lake grades, the asterisk saying, this data is taken from a
Mhm.
paired lake or
Yes.
paired bay.
The information was there, but not well defined or clearly defined, so we've clarified things.
Absolutely. Any other questions or comments, managers? Thank you very much, Ms.
Thank
Dooley
you.
and Mr. Bischoff.
Thank you very much.
Very nice presentation.
Yeah,
Thank you very much. Very
As Ms. Sylvia comes forward to speak to permit 15-192, I'd like to see a show of hands if there are members of the audience who would like an opportunity to speak for a couple of minutes regarding this permit. Were you going to answer that question?
Yes.
I stole your
Sorry.
thunder. Ms. Sylvia, go ahead.
So this is Donald Peterson. He's a representative of the applicant. The permit was requested to be brought before the board. However, those that requested the hearing are not present tonight.
Thank you.
So, President White, Board of Managers, permit 15192 is for a 4-lot subdivision in the city of Tonka Bay, which triggers the district's erosion control, stormwater management, floodplain alteration, and wetland protection rules. And as I said, the project's before the board tonight as a request of the public. However, the public is not here. I'll lay out the project location, project details, and how the rules are proposed to be met by the applicant, and staff recommendation moving forward. The project is located in the city of Tonka Bay, and it is located on that peninsula, the south of Big Island and just north of Excelsior. The applicant's proposing a 4-lot subdivision with 3 buildable lots and 1 outlot. The 3 buildable lots will be sold individually and built on at a later date, and the structures and impervious surface areas are not proposed as part of this permit. So staff held an informational meeting for those neighbors that requested the public hearing and other neighbors who had expressed concern about the project. We learned from the community that their concerns were based on historical flooding issues on Sunrise Avenue, which is to the north of the lot, and then also potential flooding risk for the adjacent landlocked basin, which is downstream of the project. According to historical aerial imagery, this lot was once an open body of water, similar to the adjacent pond, and was filled around the 1950s and has since remained an open lot. At the meeting, staff was able to explain that according to engineer review, it was found that the project was designed to not exacerbate these existing flooding conditions, but their request for hearing was still maintained. The original plan met district rules for proposed compensatory flood storage by providing that compensation area, as well as the proposed rain garden in Outlot A, highlighted in yellow. Through preliminary and final plat approval with the City of Tonka Bay, the city and the developer negotiated a more substantial grading plan on Outlot A that provides additional floodplain storage to further address the concern of flooding on Sunrise Avenue. And these plans were submitted for district review and exceed our requirement for floodplain alteration. So I'll just go through the rules. First rule that's triggered is erosion control due to the site disturbance on site. The applicant has proposed the appropriate BMPs to meet the district's erosion control rule. They include silt fence located down gradient of proposed construction, protecting the wetland and the wetland buffer, and they've also provided rock construction entrances. And the site will be stabilized with 6 inches of topsoil. And so with that, the erosion control is met. Since the applicant is proposing to subdivide the property, and they're also altering the direction of flow on the property, the stormwater management rule is triggered. However, the applicant is not proposing to build impervious surfaces. Staff did take a look at what areas of impervious surface might result as the houses come in over time, and we determined based on the proposed plan that it would be less than 20% of the total site area. Therefore, the applicant wasn't required to treat phosphorus rate and volume control. However, staff proposes that when the single-family homes do come in, that the proposed impervious surfaces will be required to be consistent with this plan that's approved now in order to maintain that compliance with the stormwater rule exemption. So for floodplain alteration, the floodplain on site was modeled off of the wetland, and the 100-year floodplain elevation based off of that is 932, which is shown in blue. In order to maintain 3 buildable lots, the applicant has proposed 5,970 cubic feet of fill below that 932 contour. And so in order to meet the standards of the rule, the applicant must provide that same amount in compensatory storage. The applicant is proposing 13,710 cubic feet of flood storage below the new 932 contour, which is shown in green. The storage basin designed by the City of Tonka Bay is highlighted in yellow and provides approximately 10,470 cubic feet of flood storage. Thus, the net increase in flood storage as a result of the project is 7,740 cubic feet. Another requirement of the district's floodplain alteration rule is that there must be 2 feet of vertical separation between low openings and the 100-year flood elevation. As the applicant is not proposing these new structures, we are also recommending another stipulation of the permit that when future houses do come in, they must comply with that standard of the floodplain alteration rule. And so the floodplain alteration rule is met. So the wetland protection rule, during application review, a wetland was identified on site. MCWD approved a notice of decision for this boundary and type. And so the applicant is not proposing to impact the wetland. However, because the stormwater management rule is triggered, as well as the proposed construction upgradient of the wetland, the buffer provision of the wetland protection rule is applied. And so the applicant has proposed a 25-foot buffer around the wetland. And the applicant proposed this buffer before the city designed the retention pond. Once the retention pond was designed, it encroached on that buffer area, and so the applicant has provided the buffer averaging necessary to meet the intention of the rule. The site plans also include buffer signage and will be recorded on the declaration. And so the wetland protection rule is met. So staff recommends that the project meets all applicable rules and requirements, and approval with the conditions listed in the permit report and proposed stipulations I mentioned earlier in the presentation. If there's any questions, I will take them now.
Let me first get a motion to approve.
Move approval.
Is there a second?
Second.
Are there questions? Manager Olson?
When the water was really high 2 years ago, this was underwater, correct, in most of this area?
I'm Don Peterson, and I'm a civil engineer and I'm representing Allen Shazen Homes. What was the question?
2 years ago, when we had the high water in Lake Minnetonka, we were above the 931 mark. So that would have meant that this area would have been underwater at that time.
Yeah, there was some of the area was, and we have not impacted the wetland at all. We stayed completely out of that. There is a curb cut now that runs water into the wetland. We proposed, last year, a 4-lot subdivision, building lot subdivision, and the city council did approve that. But then the watershed district and the city engineer came up with another plan. We revised that to a 3-lot building lot plan with the idea that we'd provide a stormwater. We had an infiltration basin, but the watershed district looked at that and thought that the soils were probably wouldn't work there. So now we have created a much larger storage basin. It's probably 3 times as big as what we originally had approved. We think that's a good proposal. The staff and the city engineer came up with some revisions of our grading plan, and we are providing another curb cut. In addition to the curb cut that is existing that runs water into the wetland, we're providing another curb cut to run the water into the infiltration basin, which should help the area. The city also wanted to obtain ownership of that outlot so that in the future, if they had other projects that they wanted to do to solve some of the water problems in the area, they could do that. And we agreed to do that. The provision that we agreed to with the city was that we would do all the improvements on the outlet, put in, do the grading, plant the trees, put the vegetation in the outlet, put the buffer signs in, and do all of that. And at the time that we're complete with that, the city would then, and we file our documents, the city would then take the ownership of that outlet. And they did that because there is an existing culvert that runs to a pond to the west. We have no control of what happens to that pond. So what we're trying to do is provide much more storage to lessen the impact on that pond and provide another outlet to get the water off the street. Eventually, who knows what the city might do. Maybe they'll come in for a storm sewer, but we have no control over that.
Okay, so all these homes would be on slabs of concrete?
What?
There's no basements in any of these homes, correct?
No, well, there's no storm sewer there at all. No.
Right.
No, is there
Probably
basements?
should be done in the future, but it would impact the homes, and, you know, and we have no control of that. But the city wanted to own the outlet so they control what might happen in the future. We agreed to that, as I think is a good plan.
The
So-
question
Andrew,
was, is there basement? Is there basements in the homes?
Is there what?
The basements under the homes?
No, there
Okay.
will be no basements. They'll probably be 2-story homes. And are much larger, the lots are much larger than homes across the street. There'd been no provision whatsoever in any of the homes in the area to provide any kind of stormwater solving of the problem. Our lots are much larger, and there will not be any basement. They'll probably be 2-story homes. The city agreed that they will look, we're doing all the grading that we have to do up front. We're not doing any grading on the other property until we come in for a grading plan on each individual lot. At that point in time, the city will look to make sure that that is done. But we have an overall grading plan which shows that we are providing additional storage for stormwater plus the sedimentation pond.
Okay, thank you.
Or I'm sorry, I said sedimentation would be storage pond.
Question for you, Ms. Sylvia. The slide indicates, of course, that the recorded declaration will alert anyone about wetland buffers, signage, and retention pond. Does it also alert everyone to the fact that there has to be the freeboard and other conditions of the permit? How do people know that when they walk in?
It is not currently on the draft of the declaration, but that can be added. It's also something that we'll look for when the permits come in for those lots as well.
So it's a guarantee that whoever comes to buy this will have to talk to us about whether you get a permit, and you'll pull up the file and then we'll know.
Yes.
Any other questions? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, Mr.
Thank you
Peterson.
very much.
Mr. Peterson, could I ask for your address for our record?
What?
Would you also state your address for our record?
I didn't understand.
State your address.
Oh, address?
Yes.
My address is 7220 York Avenue South, Unit 218, Edina.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks.
Um, 11.2, Resolution 16-051, authorization to distribute CIP for annual review and comment. Ms. Christopher.
Thank you, Madam Chair, managers.
As the board knows, our comprehensive plan requires that the district annually revise and distribute its CIP to the cities and counties for review and comment. Earlier drafts of the CIP have been reviewed with the Planning and Policy Committee in April and May. And one thing that we discussed in those meetings was that we're really in a transition period right now between the current plan, which the CIP extends just through 2016, and the development of the new plan and CIP. And so, whereas typically we try to look out at least 3 years with the CIP, with this year, since we're in the process of working with our communities to develop that, we discussed that we'd recommend sending a reduced version that just shows projects slated for construction this year and next year, just to let communities know what we'll be doing until the next plan is adopted. And then our other recommendation was, with this distribution, we'd also send out an information request for, which is something we were going to do anyway, but pairing it with this to explain that we're asking for their plans, their priorities, their development projections to really help us inform our next CIP. And so the committee was generally in favor with that direction. So we have refined a few of the numbers and funding sources since that was last reviewed, but otherwise it's generally in line with what was reviewed at the last PPC meeting. So again, tonight we're requesting authorization to distribute that for 30-day review and comment, and then any comments received will be brought back to the board for consideration prior to adoption. So with that, I'll take any questions.
Thank you. Is there a motion to approve Resolution 16051? Is there a second?
Second.
Questions or comments? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you.
Good, thanks.
We'll now hear items 11.3 and 11.4 with a conjoined presentation involves the same property. Ms. Damjancic.
I'll be handing out a red line resolution. Michelle. The red line resolution you have in front of you is as a result of the communication we had with the City of Medina staff on Monday morning. There was language in the original conservation easement document that covers some indemnification of the watershed district by the City of Medina, and the city staff asked that that language be removed and put into a separate document. So the resolution, the red line resolution, now covers both execution of the conservation easement as well as execution of the indemnification agreement with the City of Medina. So that's the framework of those two documents. And in all, tonight staff is seeking authorization to execute 3 documents: the Deer Hill Preserve conservation easement, the indemnification agreement with the City of Medina, as well as a memorandum of understanding with the City of Medina. I'll provide a little bit of background since we were last before the board about this project. Deer Hill Preserve is a 191-acre development in the cities of Medina and Orono. And 41 residential lots will be developed under the City of Medina's Conservation Design Plan Unit Development by Property Resources Development Corporation. Mike and Sue Sealand of PRDC are here this evening, and I'd just like to take the opportunity to thank both of them for being excellent project partners. They've been very dedicated to providing for the best possible outcome for this project, and I appreciate all their efforts. The Conservation Design PUD ordinance requires wetlands, buffers, and an additional 30% of upland buildable land area to be held in conservation easement. And the Watershed District is poised to hold that conservation easement. I'll give you a bit of background on the timeline and process of this project. PRDC first approached the Watershed District about being the conservation easement holder in January of 2015. And when the staff approached the PPC committee regarding support for the Watershed District holding the conservation easement, they did express support and continued to do so during staff updates in March and November of 2015 and in February, March, and May of 2016. The district also entered into a memorandum of understanding with PRDC in June of 2015, and it basically outlined the parties' mutual interest in advancing conservation objectives on the property, and the district also decided to explore the potential of being the conservation easement holder at that time. On March 24th, 2016, the board passed a resolution of support for serving as a conservation easement holder. This was basically an interim resolution of support so that the city of Medina would understand that the district was working with the developer to finalize the easement language, and kind of kept them moving along in their process with the city towards their final plat approval. Up to this point, over the last 15 months, the district has provided technical and regulatory guidance to the developer and coordination with the city of Medina. And this project, because it has two partners, has many moving parts, it has had a lot of public input, and the coordination of the timing between the developer and the city has just made it a pretty complex project, which required a significant investment of staff time. However, we believe that this investment in time in getting the documents prepared will really set us up for success in terms of monitoring the easement over the long term. The framework of documents provides a number of protections for the district. Although the watershed district will be the conservation easement holder and have the primary enforcement role, the city of Medina will also have third-party right of enforcement and assessment authority to recover costs for correction of noncompliance on the easement. The land stewardship plan, which is an exhibit to the conservation easement, provides a plan for the restoration and establishment of the restoration areas, and commits the developer and the future homeowners association to provide an annual escrow account to fund the long-term maintenance and management of the conservation areas. A number of benefits are also provided to the district by holding the conservation easement. The easement will perpetually protect this land identified by the watershed district as a key conservation area. And it also positions the district to provide responsive technical guidance to both the developer, the city, and the future homeowners association. And the conserved land provides linkages to established and potential conservation areas. So in this overview map, the subject property is this long linear property right here in mint green. The Peter Reckelbacher property is just to the west of the north end of the Deer Hole Preserve property. And then those are both areas where we could potentially hold conservation easements. And in addition to those potentially conserved areas, the Baker Park, Three Rivers Park District's Baker Park is just here to the west, and then Woolsfeld Woods Scientific and Natural Area is there to the east. So it does provide a really significant corridor linkage between those two sites. And then looking a little more closely at the property itself, the conservation area is comprised of two significant conservation areas. The reserve is 48 acres of largely intact wetlands, woodlands, and upland areas. The reserve also includes 18 acres of a 48-acre tamarack bog, which is on the north end of the property. No immediate restoration will occur in the reserve areas because they, as I said, are largely intact, but the HOA has flexibility within the documents to do some resource enhancement in the reserve areas, should they choose to do so at a later time. The restoration area is about 41 acres, and it is largely currently farmed areas, upland farmed areas, as well as degraded wetlands, and that's where the bulk of the restoration work will take place. The developer plans to initiate restoration in 2016. The upland areas are currently planted in wheat, and they are receiving herbicide applications that will support the wheat, as well as provide some site preparation for fall seeding, which is to take place this fall in 2016. The conservation area in total is 89 acres. As I said, the reserve is 48 acres, the restoration area is 41 acres. The restoration will take place between 2016 and 2019. It will be initiated this fall and then continue through 2019. The conservation area maintenance will be funded in the beginning by the developer and then transferred to the homeowners association in fee. The district is to perform at least annual monitoring of the easement areas. However, probably during these first few years, we'll provide more technical guidance to the developer as they're getting the site established. The conservation areas will also include public trails that will be built and maintained by the City of Medina. And this shows a little bit closer view of the trails that will be installed by the city. And that is what the indemnification agreement addresses. The indemnification agreement with the City of Medina provides for water resource protection and site disturbance restoration during trail installation and trail maintenance, as well as it indemnifies the district from any claims arising from the city's design, installation, and maintenance of the trails, as well as public use of the trails. So just to go through the document framework, an overview of that. Tonight, staff is seeking authorization to execute both the easement and the indemnification agreement. However, the indemnification agreement must be executed in advance of the execution of the conservation easement. The indemnification agreement will go to Medina City Council on June 7th, at which point the conservation easement can be executed by our board. And lastly, addressing the memorandum of understanding with between the Watershed District and the City of Medina. We're seeking authorization to execute that MOU tonight as well. Although the district will be the easement holder and have the primary enforcement role of the easement, Medina also has third-party right of enforcement, as I mentioned. And they also have the authority, which is a huge benefit to the district, to assess the fee owners and the residential lots any cost to investigate and address non-compliance issues. This would be sort of like the stopgap effort. Certainly, the district would be in contact with Homeowners Association to correct any non-compliance issues, provide that guidance, and coordinate with the city. However, if the HOA became non-responsive to those issues at a later date, then we would have that opportunity to work with the city to correct any issues, and then that cost would be assessed against the Homeowners Association. And I'll take any questions.
First, is there a motion to approve Resolution 16-052? Motion and second. Question, Manager Miller?
No question. I just want to compliment you on how complete and thorough this presentation is. It's incredibly complex, and I'm sure it's taken an incredible amount of time to put this all together. But it sure makes it easy to make a decision on it with all this information, the clarity.
And it does help that we've had countless presentations about plate. It's such a complicated parcel.
Kept us informed as we went along, absolutely. Are we ready to vote?
Sure.
All those in favor of
Aye.
Resolution 16-052 say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Is there a motion to approve Resolution 16-053, which is the MOU with Medina?
So moved. Second.
Manager Becker, is there a second? Manager Shackleton, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Whisker?
One question
Yes.
about other easements that we do. What happens if a road authority comes in and condemns, or a utility authority comes in and condemns our property that's eased? Is there any replacement language in the easement or payback or anything like that?
Is that a question for legal staff?
I think so.
For our attorney? Mr. Smith? I
Madam-
don't think I said hello this evening. Hello.
Hello. Madam President Manager Becker, to my recollection, there is not a provision for event of eminent domain. I don't know what the likelihood of that scenario is, or if that's been an issue that's been discussed by the parties. Perhaps Ms. Damjanic has some comment, but
There is not
otherwise-
any language in the easement currently that addresses that condition. It's something that was, I think, maybe brought up at a previous PPC committee meeting. And at that time, I think it was you, Louis, that addressed it, but I might be wrong. I believe if the property were to go into tax forfeiture at a later date, then the county would have the ability to collect taxes on that property once it was sold again.
If it's a condemnation for utilities or roads or something like that, there's an evaluation of the value of the condemnation and money's paid generally to the landowner, the person who owns the underlying fee. So you have to specify that you participate in that in some fashion or another. And that would send money back to the district for losing an asset that we can't say that's being condemned.
My understanding of condemnation is that all, if you went to valuation hearings, all ownerships get valuation assigned to them.
Yes, you can do that, but with an easement, the condemnation price is, that I'm familiar with, is a single price. And the parties to the easement or to the property have to make the division.
Interesting.
That we need to look into for future.
That would be my suggestion.
Yeah.
We can work on that with legal counsel and provide a response at a later date, some feedback in terms of how we build that into future easement work that we're doing.
Madam President,
Yes.
my only other comment would be, I'm quite confident that if there were to be some eminent domain action, that the district would be notified and would participate.
Certainly.
And this issue of how our easement interests are compensated opposed to the underlying fee owners is not one that I can speak to, and we could be happy to take a look at it.
Thank you. Mr. Whisker.
I just wanted to recognize the Sealands who came tonight, who are the current property owners, Mike and Susan, who worked really closely with Laura, and just say thank you to Laura and the Sealands for just a long-term commitment and vision to the site, and all of their patience working through the details. This thing's been round and round and then round again, I think about 2 or 3 times at City Council and with us and with interested neighbors, and just a lot of details and perspectives that have had to get woven into the land stewardship plan and the easement and all the agreements that Laura laid out for you tonight. So I just wanted to let you know that they've been really great to work with, and say thank you to them and Laura for all their hard work.
Thank you, Mr. and Mrs. Sealand. Appreciate it very
Thank you,
much.
and thanks.
It's an exciting project.
Thank
Exciting.
you very much, and really looking forward to work with that.
Thank you.
I think you just made them blush.
It's just really hot.
It's hot.
I've been watching for the last 2 hours.
Item 11.5 is Resolution 16-054, authorization to execute an agreement with Lennar Corporation. Ms. Brown. Ms. Sylvia.
Just a quick little update in advance of Anna's presentation of the agreement. I'd like to provide an update of the Lennar project and permit approvals thus far. So this is an update for permit 15266. To recap, permit 15266 is for the Lennar Laketown 9th development in Victoria. The development included the construction of a road and utility crossing, which proposed approximately an acre of permanent wetland impact. Lennar, at the time of permit submittal, were unable to replace for the wetland on site and had originally proposed replacement via wetland banking. Throughout the permit process, Lennar, Minnehaha Creek, and the City of Victoria came together to pursue a wetland replacement plan that would achieve greater natural resource benefit, and took a look at pursuing wetland replacement on the adjacent Hess property. As Lennar was not obligated to purchase the land in order to develop their replacement plan, the district took on a role of land acquisition in order to facilitate this partnership and produce this outcome. So the permit came before the board at the end of August last year, and the board issued the erosion control permit as it was not associated with the wetland impact. The additional permits for this project were linked to the wetland impact at that time with the road crossing and the utility crossing, and so those permits were made conditional upon approval of the replacement plan. And you can see where that original road and utility crossing was in the original area for wetland impact. Since that time, the sequencing of the utility and the road crossing has changed, as Paul had alluded to earlier this evening. The new alignment for the utilities was no longer linked to the permanent wetland impact, which was the original requirement for the replacement plan. And so in order to maintain Lennar's construction timeline, staff has issued permits for utility work that's no longer associated with this wetland impact requiring the replacement plan. At this time, road construction and wetland impact are still contingent upon the wetland replacement plan approval, and the agreement that Anya is bringing before you tonight is the next step in producing that replacement plan.
Thank you. Ms. Brown?
Madam President.
Yes, Mr. Smith?
I think before Ms. Brown presents, in light of Ms. Sylvia's presentation and the actions that the staff took to issue the permits and the conditions you had back in August of 2015, we would request that you as a board adopt a motion ratifying those permit decisions. And I think you have a good explanation for why they were originally to be conditioned upon your approval of the wetland replacement plan, but several events overtook that and made it, in staff's judgment, appropriate for them to issue the permits and the work proceeded. We just want the record to be clear that you have ratified that, so we would request that you would adopt such a motion.
Thank you. Is there a motion to ratify those decisions?
I move that we ratify the decisions.
Manager Olson, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Rognus, questions? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Thank you.
Is it?
Oh, Manager Olson.
I just want to make a comment that when we did we observed the presentation from the city engineer to the city council in Victoria on this whole solution, and they essentially boiled it down to they could have spent $250,000 in Wright County, but now Lennar is spending $250,000 in our county, and they're going to restore a wetland, and everybody benefits. So that's how they relate to it.
Mm-hmm.
It's a wonderful solution. Thank you.
One additional comment, President White, is that several of us were standing right about the left end of that black line on Saturday. So it's kind of interesting to see. We saw kind of the disturbed road and the blankets and erosion control measures being installed as we were watching. So it's nice to kind of have that visual point of reference to
Those
on the
large
board tour.
pieces of equipment are moving across the horizon.
The ground was vibrating.
Great, thank you.
All right, so with that, I'm seeking approval on Resolution 16054, approving the agreement between MCWD and Lennar Corporation to restore wetlands in the city of Victoria. So the site is in the city of Victoria, just southeast of Wasserman Lake. And the area that we're talking about is a 23-acre wetland on one of the only remaining undeveloped parcels in the city of Victoria, which was something we really got a sense of during the board tour, sort of how much development and movement is happening out there. And like Lars said, we stood right at the edge, the end of that street there, and looked out over the wetland area and also over the very large development and grading work that is going on. So Lennar came to the city and district back in early 2015 with plans for a 99-unit housing development. And as Catherine mentioned, a component of that development was the improvement of this old farm road that not only serves this development, but also had been identified as a critical connecting piece for the city of Victoria. And in that improvement, they would end up impacting 0.87 acres of wetland. All the parties came together under the framework that was outlined in our Memorandum of Understanding with the City of Victoria and looked to identify an opportunity to mitigate that impact. As Catherine said, the first sort of step is to look on site. They weren't able to replace on site. So through this collaborative partnership approach, we were able to identify a solution that would do restoration work within the wetland on the Hess property and would restore a total of 12 acres of wetland. So Lennar's regulatory obligation would be between 2 and 4 acres. So we're gaining
a substantial addition over what would be required just under rules. Preliminary feasibility was completed by the district with the help of WANC, and the approach and the framework received substantial support from other regulatory agencies, including the DNR, the Board of Water and Soil Resources, the U.S. Army Corps, as well as the Carver County Soil and Water Conservation District. I think it's important to note that this approach, that under this approach, Lennar was under no regulatory obligation to go this route. Paul Tabone was here at the beginning of the meeting speaking about our partnership, and they've been really wonderful and willing partners through this process. Again, they were under no obligation to go this route. They did it as a value add to really everyone involved. So the initial partnership framework as well as the permitting framework was outlined at the August board meeting. And at that time, the board authorized staff to work with Lennar to develop an agreement for this restoration. And at that time, they also waived conflict of interest for WANC, so to allow Lennar to work directly with WANC on the replacement plan once we got to that stage. So the objective of this restoration plan is to first modify the hydrologic regime in this wetland by developing an outlet structure, and in so doing create a regime that's more supportive of native plant species. And then the other piece of this work is the restoration of the 13 acres of wetland and upland buffer area. So again, 2 to 4 acres of that restoration are required under the Wetland Conservation Act. And so going this route is supportive of the district's goal of improving wetland function versus just achieving more acreage or preserving more wetland acreage. And that vegetation management will be achieved through burning, mowing, and herbicide applications in the watershed. And then we'll be establishing native vegetation through seeding and also that supportive hydrologic regime. Under the Wetland Conservation Act, once we achieve that establishment, there's also a required 3 to 5 year establishment period where we'll be doing annual monitoring and also maintaining the property. I think the benefits of this project are numerous. As Manager Olson mentioned, one of the major benefits here is that we're maintaining local investment in natural resources. So the alternative here was that Lennar would purchase wetland bank credits outside of the district, and rather that investment that would have gone outside of the district is going to restore this site. It also achieves a previously identified capital project at reduced cost. So this area was identified for a project in the 2007 comprehensive plan, and we're now finding a way to get it done through partnership. Again, it also achieves benefits beyond what we would be able to do through regulation alone, even if they were performing an on-site or project-specific mitigation. That would only give us about 2 to 4 acres, whereas here we're getting 13. And I think it's also just a really good demonstration of what we've been talking about with this sort of more flexible and partnership-oriented approach to the way that we work with developers and the way that we pursue permitting on some of these big projects. And of course, it's just been a really good experience, not only generating goodwill with Lennar, who's a major developer in 6 Mile, but also with the City of Victoria itself, who have been very supportive and participated along the way. So the basic approach to developing this agreement was to really capitalize on each entity's respective strengths. So we realized that Lennar will be out doing construction. We saw some of that construction in the area. And so with their equipment, they would be able to perform this wetland restoration on site and achieve efficiencies beyond what probably the district could do. So we put them in, made them responsible not only for developing the plan design with Wank, but also performing the actual construction and restoration work. And of course, this is still part of a regulatory compliance issue, so they'll be managing as well permit submittals. And the district is primarily responsible for property acquisition. We discussed acquiring an easement over that Hess wetland, was it 2 weeks ago, in closed session, and we'll be bringing back a purchase agreement and term sheet for the board to review soon. And then we're also responsible for maintenance and monitoring. So looking at the costs associated with that approach, so at this point we project that property acquisition will come in at about $80,000. And then the monitoring and maintenance responsibilities of the district, those are aggregated over 5 years. So monitoring is anticipated to be around $3,500 per year, and then maintenance about $8,000 per year for that 3 to 5 year establishment period. So it is possible that we would achieve performance standards in less than 5 years, which would save project costs. We're also assuming in this table that we're contracting out for those, and that isn't necessarily the case. We're looking internally to see what we could assume responsibility for versus have to contract out. And then Lennar's costs are, the big one is that construction work. They've already identified a potential contractor to work with, and that's where that estimate comes from. And then they'll also be designing the outlet control structure along working with Wank, and then they'll be constructing that outlet. So the total project costs end up being about $254,000. But I think for each party, there's probably efficiencies that we'll achieve as we proceed into this process. These are just sort of the estimates at this time. So the general workflow following this agreement execution, Lennar is going to get started working directly with Wank to complete that replacement plan right away. And then when that replacement plan has been developed, approved, it'll have to be routed to our technical evaluation panel as well as the Army Corps and approved through them as well. At that time, we'll work directly with Wank, Lennar, and their contractor to determine the best timeline and schedule for the restoration work. And then once the restoration work is complete, probably at about a year mark, the district will be assuming the maintenance and monitoring responsibility for that 3 to 5 year period. We'll also be responsible for long-term maintenance. We'll be a permanent easement holder here on this property. And the one thing that doesn't come up here is, again, the land acquisition. We have reached preliminary agreement with the landowners on the easement and anticipate bringing that back in front of the board very soon.
First, is there a motion to approve resolution 16-054?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any questions for Ms. Brown? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you.
Actually, it's Bill Olson.
Olson and
Olson and
Shepherd.
Brian. Olson and Shackleton.
Olson?
Yeah.
To do what?
Oh, they were looking for
The
who the
first and
motion
the
and
second.
second were.
Oh,
You mean Bill?
You guys sound alike.
who?
It just came from that side of the room.
You hear the direction of the sound, yeah. We have the administrator's report, Mr. Erdahl.
Thank you, President White and managers. I have just a few things to update folks on. One is that in today's splash newsletter that went out, the lake grades were distributed. So that always kind of generates interest from the community. So we'll see what that's will bring in. And I think it's also a nice kind of point of comparison to what we already heard this evening about the E-grade process that our staff and Wank have been working on together to develop a much more robust way to kind of assess and evaluate those types of things. Manager Wilson? Yeah.
I don't want to be presumptuous here, but I noticed that Halstead's Bay for the first time improved to a C.
I noticed that too.
Which is
And
Which is
Although I was out there this past weekend, and I'm not sure if that's, I think that might have been that snapshot in time type thing, because there's a lot of floaters there right now, so I think it's, I'm not sure if that might have been a good sampling day.
Okay.
Zebra mussels?
And that was for last year, so.
Yeah, it was last summer.
There are a few zebra mussels out there, but they haven't
Taken over.
yeah.
It's so polluted.
There's too much nutrient load for them. And also just kind of following up on the efforts in 6 Mile Creek, I wanted to mention that we met with some advisors from Springshead last week with our legal counsel, and a couple of our board managers Olson and Miller were there too, to explore and further pursue options for financing going forward with projects in 6 Mile Creek. So that seems to be something that we've had really good positive feedback from. I know Manager Olson has been in touch with some of the county commissioners and others, so we are continue to look into those things and pursue those options. Also last week, several staff and Manager Miller attended the Southwest Light Rail Train Community Work Steering Committee, and there is an update on some of the progress report for planning and things like that. That was again, I think a real positive step forward for us in terms of collaborating with our partners in the community and in furthering those efforts in that corridor. President White already mentioned the bandstand ribbon cutting last week as well. Our Talia Mike presented on behalf of some comments and remarks on behalf of the Watershed District, and which were very well received. And we were kind of prominently thanked and appreciated by everyone that was there that we spoke with too. So I think that was a good opportunity for both the district and also the other partners that were involved in that project. We met with a resident from Long Lake last week who's kind of setting up a meeting with some of our staff to talk about water quality issues on Long Lake and kind of some of the challenges and also the options going forward with that. So there's going to be some more community meetings that will follow on that. And Mike Heyman, Renee Clark, and Kelly Dooley have all been kind of working together in terms of bringing together the information that will help that be a more productive meeting. And then also just as a follow-up to some of the other things we've talked about regarding budget is that next week we've set up the last couple of years quarterly meetings with our auditor staff from Redpath just to kind of do a check-in to make sure there's no kind of surprises looming, there's no rule changes or other things that we need to track differently. So Dave Mant and I will be meeting with the staff, Dave Minch from Redpath next Wednesday. So, and that's all I have.
Manager Olson?
You mentioned Southwest Light Rail. Are we going to have another Minnesota Miracle to get that back on track?
This was, we met before the end of the session, so that was still a possibility at that time. So I'm not, I don't know, maybe Manager Shackleton or Manager Miller might have some more insight on that, but it's I'm not sure what the path forward might be.
I think at this point nobody knows. Just very simply, the Republican leadership, both in the House and the Senate, have been very consistent in their messaging about how they don't believe that investing in trains for transit is a worthwhile investment of resources. And the governor has been, the day after session adjourned, he was very direct, and I think there's media coverage in almost every source in the metro. And at this point, he hasn't taken a position on the major bills, and he said he would do that either by the end of the week or by the beginning of next week. And the Republican leadership have, at least the House Republican leadership have done meetings around the state on a variety of issues. Again, their messaging on Southwest Light Rail has been consistent. So at this point, I think anybody's guess is as good as anybody else's.
We thought the buffer bill was dead.
What happened?
It passed. It's been signed by the governor.
Right.
And the government, the news of the agreement with Land O'Lakes is really encouraging for beginning to create some sort of baseline expectations for the use of land by farmers in greater Minnesota, which is also good news to follow up on the buffer bill legislation.
You know, that was really significant, because, you know, it's a, Land O'Lakes is an important partner for the farming community, and they've always had a strong voice about rural issues, and I was really surprised that they stepped forward. They could have just stayed out of it, but it's really a good corporate citizen. At Land O'Lakes it's always been, but this is almost stepping way beyond their normal realm of you know, safe endorsements, because this could have caused a backlash with their members, but I think it's getting to a point where everybody is starting to get an understanding of the importance of clean water, especially in the southern portion of the state.
I got an email today from the Cap Region Watershed District. They're hosting a Bowser Metro Watershed District Buffer Rule update on Tuesday the 7th at 2 o'clock at Cap Region. And they'll have reps there from Bowser.
And just to piggyback on Dick, the other piece that's so amazing about Land O'Lakes is it's a cooperative.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't fathom a scenario where their leadership would take a position like that without having touch base with their membership.
Right.
That speaks, sure. Yeah, and that speaks to like a kind of a sea change of something.
Would you repeat the Bowser meeting?
Tuesday, June 7th.
That's our mod meeting.
It's not the regular one. This is at 2 o'clock until 4:30.
No, that's not the regular.
At 2 o'clock?
From 2 o'clock until 4:30 at the Cap Region office, and this is the address.
Okay.
1410 Energy Park Drive, Suite 4, St. Paul. It will be good. We are adjourned.